All right, everybody. It is so great to be here with you. And this week, we're going to be talking a little specifically about revenues and thinking about how do we engage in revenue development and what do we do with revenues. So, we're going to start in our textbook, and you'll probably notice that this week I broke up the readings for you a little bit, right? I want us to think about specifically about revenues, even though they are inexplicably tied to expenses. And so, a couple of thoughts around that, right? Typically, the most common sources of revenue are our state appropriated funds, tuition, which can be undergraduate, graduate, or we also need to consider when we talk about tuition what we call tuition discounting, which is basically the idea, and we talked about this last week a little bit, that we might have our sticker price, but then often we offer scholarships to recruit students. And so that tuition discounting, which can be as high as 60 or 70% at some institutions, but for most institutions, that'll be a little bit lower. But the idea here is this is a little bit of fake money, right? Because we say we're going to get this much, but really we're offering to scholarships to reduce that cost to the students. And then, of course, we have student fees. And I would hope that as you think about student fees, you take some time to even look at your undergraduate institution, for example, and consider the student fees that your undergraduate institution has, and think about those mandatory versus optional fees, and think about that as a kind of a hidden cost that might exist in higher ed. Other sources of revenue, often we have endowments. Not all institutions will have this, but many will. We'll have gifts and philanthropy, both from annual giving, but also large gifts and long-term campaigns. We'll have grants and contracts. Community colleges in particular might have a number of these with local entities, but four-year institutions also have them. And then, I wanted just to pose this question from the readings that I really did appreciate, where it talks about gifts that eat, right? And the basic premise there is that sometimes we're given a large gift, or a donation comes in, but then it comes with strings attached, right? And so we end up spending a lot of money to maintain the gift. And so that's why sometimes you see institutions that either give money back or they think about, maybe not taking that gift to begin with. A couple of other places that we often get resources, auxiliary services. For many people that work in this space, this is our kind of a for-profit entity, that they gain resources and then they reinvest it into their contracts and things like that. We also have institutional services. A lot of institutions will contract out their food or their housing services. We have hospitals for some institutions, licenses, patents. This is kind of that form of academic capitalism that you may have been exposed to before. And then, of course, some institutions have specialized support. If you're a religious institution, or if you have another aspect as well. And so these all have a certain number of risks, but they also are there as a way to support institutions. This week, we also dug into a little bit of the Hearn article where we thought about responsibility-centered management. Really, what this is alluding to is that institutions get to use the money that they bring in, right? And there was a quote in here that public institutions are slow to experiment with the approach of responsibility-centered management, but that more and more institutions are adopting this practice as a way to kind of encourage their team to be more thoughtful of the revenue that they have. I also had you read an article by Johnstone talking about revenue diversification. The main idea here is that institutions need to be very thoughtful of how they're going about kind of increasing revenue. And so we need to diversify those sources. We're given 10 to 12 in the chapter, but there's other ways that institutions can increase revenue as well. So again, hope this was insightful and thoughtful as you thought about revenue with your own institution. And I look forward to seeing you in our article discussion this week and hope you have a great rest of your day.